So after engaging in a bizarre stunt at a closed McDonald's in Pennsylvania, where he was pretending his supporters were customers, then going to a Pittsburgh Steelers game where he was booed, Donald Trump, you guessed it, is now selling T-shirts, MAGA Donald's T-shirts. This is part of his closing message, I suppose, in the campaign. The other closing message is vote for the felon. The other closing message is he takes multiple cognitive tests. The other closing message is that he heard that Arnold Palmer has a large penis. This is the type of things that the leader of the Republican Party is talking about, and the supporters of him in this age of both sides media. Look, just take a look. I'm voting for the convicted felon. They go to Trump's events wearing shirts that say, I'm voting for the convicted felon. Here's one of Donald Trump's top surrogates, Laura Loomer. Picked up my new hat today in Alabama. I'm voting for the convicted felon. And there's one moment recently that stands out in my mind. It's still chilling. I reported on it last week, this Al Smith dinner. It deserves to be talked about again because here you are in this white tie event in Manhattan. Everyone's dressed fancy. They got gloves on. And they're talking about Donald Trump sexually assaulting women. Donald Trump was found liable for sexual assault in a jury. He's a convicted felon there. He's sitting next to a Catholic priest at this dinner. Just watch what happened one more time.
During the first and only debate, President Trump talked about migrants taking cats and eating them. If you're keeping track at home, this is the second time grabbing a kitty has been part of a campaign issue.
We talked about leaving that out.
I was going to leave that out.
Forget leaving that out. Maybe you should have left him out of the event. A convicted felon, someone found liable for sexual assault. I want to bring in Jonathan Alter, author of the new book, American Reckoning, Inside Trump's Trial and My Own. A personal note, I grew up watching Jonathan Alter. I've been a big fan of Jonathan Alter. He reached out, said that he was a Meidas Mighty and a fan of what we did at the MeidasTouch Network. And I knew he had this book coming out. So I said, we got to talk about it. Another fun fact about Jonathan Alter, he's interviewed 9 presidents, including Richard Nixon, which is a major part of why he wanted to write American Reckoning. He was at the trial. So Jonathan, welcome to the MeidasTouch Network. And would love to just get your reaction to first what I showed you there in that initial opening.
Well, this was vintage Trump, but it was hugely embarrassing, I think, for the Catholic Church, which claims to stand for morality and just sold out to Trump like so many other people. I think the net effect of it was probably minimal. I wish that Harris had gone, just because I think when she's measured side by side with Trump, she does well, as in that debate. But it's not a huge thing either way. He's clearly, as they say about people with senility, he's disinhibited in new ways. He really is headed for dementia if he is reelected, and then J.D. Vance will be president of the United States. I think J.D. Vance will be the effective president almost from day one, because Trump has no interest in governing. And Vance, who is a smarter, more dangerous Trump, will be running the country. And Vance has made it very clear that he doesn't believe in democracy at all. And unlike Trump, for whom everything is transactional, with Vance, it's actually heartfelt. I mean, he just doesn't believe our system is the right form of government for the United States. And if you want to talk more about that, I can. I do an American Reckoning, among other things.
Let's talk about that. First, though, let's talk about American Reckoning from kind of Nixon to Donald Trump. It seemed with Trump, when he was in office, there was a Watergate taking place every single day. And now, I mean, if you could imagine if Trump were to have engaged in in a Watergate, Would it even register on the map today? Would it even be a blip in our news cycle? I mean, you hear the story reported, well, look, Donald Trump may have taken a $10 million bribe from Egypt, and there's a lot of credible information. Where did this $10 million come from? And then it just kind of, boop, next story, he's at a McDonald's, boop, next story, here we go. So what's going on? I mean, you've covered this for a long time. What's going on, and how do we cover this the right way?
Well, you're absolutely right that, things have changed so much. I once wrote a column about this. I refer to it in American Reckoning, that if Watergate happened now, Fox would just run a Chiron assault on the presidency, and they wouldn't cover it at all. Interestingly, the hush money trial, where I was in the courtroom every day, and a good chunk of the book is about this, me taking shots at Trump, very acerbic trial diary that I have in this book. But the hush money trial was pretty much the same as what, Nixon was accused of, paying hush money to the Watergate burglars. But in this case, when Trump was held in contempt of court 10 times, to your point, it wasn't even the biggest story of the day. Imagine any other president being held in contempt of court. And just, in the book, I describe other presidents' connections to the criminal justice system. So, Nixon was pardoned and Bill Clinton lost his law license, but they were never tried, much less convicted, of crimes. And other than that, Ulysses S. Grant got a speeding ticket for driving his carriage too fast in Washington. Harry Truman got a ticket for driving his car too slow on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And that's it, Ben, that's it. So what we're seeing now is totally unusual and completely unprecedented in American history. And to your question, the real problem here in terms of covering it is that there is no media anymore, like I used to be part of when people like me were gatekeepers and we had a much bigger part in this process. Everything is run by algorithms. Everything is siloed in the media, and people just watch what will validate their own view. And so, the result is that we can't really tell the truth to the American people. I felt, and this connects to this story I talk about with my encounter with Nixon, who I wanted to meet before he croaked and did in 1988. I felt that, my job, the only thing I can bring to the party is to bear witness, right? And so that's what I do in American Reckoning. But I think for everybody else, it's about thinking hard about what they can do in the days before this election takes place. I have a section of the book called We Do Our Part. And what that refers to is that at the depths of the Depression, Franklin Roosevelt had people hang a decal in their windows, the blue eagle, and it said underneath, "We do our part." So everybody has to figure out what is their part in this election. For me, it's bearing witness, as I do in this book, and assembling as much anti-Trump material in 250 pages as I can, and hoping that maybe some people buy it for their Uncle Bob, who doesn't like Trump, doesn't like Harris, is thinking about voting for the couch. And maybe it can convince him that this is not the lesser of two evils. You have one candidate who might be flawed, you might not like certain of her positions, and you have another candidate who's evil. So it's not lesser of two evils. And so if this can be conveyed to even a few hundred voters, it can make a difference. Everybody has to do their part. And for people who are watching, I think, and other Democrats, it's about stopping wringing your hands and starting to ring doorbells, or to use these call tools where you can call into battleground states from the comfort of your own home. You can do 25 calls a night easily and get out the vote, because that's what's going to make the difference. A lot of people don't even realize that they can use these computer call tools, very easily accessible on KamalaHarris.org. You can .com. You can get access to doing this, and it actually makes a huge difference in battleground states. Or other people might want to give money. Lawyers might want to go work precincts in battleground states to prevent the Republicans from preventing people from voting. There's all kinds of things that people can do if they want to do their part.
Do you think there is a realignment that is taking place in politics right now, where traditional labels of progressive versus conservative or liberal v conservative, that those just don't fit the moment? And it just seems that the coalitions that exist right now, where you have Vice President Kamala Harris and a Liz Cheney, who may disagree on a lot of issues, fundamentally still believe in democracy. And then on the other side, and you've alluded to it earlier in this interview and in your book, there's just a very different worldview, a worldview that's viewed as this fascistic, strong man, or wannabe strong man, what we've seen in other countries, this MAGA, which really isn't the Republican Party, it's the Trump MAGA party. Media still acting like the old ways of descriptive terms is what applies. And I just, to your point, bearing witness, what we try to do here on the MeidasTouch Network is bear witness to what we're seing. And when they start saying, oh, the conservative, I'm like, he doesn't even want to conserve there's nothing conservative about any of their views. And so you alluded to that worldview, but do you think that's going to be a big story after this election, or potentially?
No question, no question. And just to finish on the media point, the problem with the mainstream media, that I still belong to a certain extent, is that they're covering the horse race as usual when this is a stakes election. And, they're not two sides about democracy. The media needs to be pro-democracy. You can be biased in favor of democracy. So this election should be seen as about the stakes for the future of the country and our system. And people like Liz Cheney are talking about this. And so it's country over party. And not to mention, as former Republican Governor Asa Hutchinson said, he can't vote for a convicted felon. So the issues here are this is not a normal election. And there's a problem on the part of the media that I discuss in American Reckoning, where too often it's seen as that. And I think we have to do what we can. And Harris is doing this by showing clips from Trump rallies at her events. As General Mark Milley said, he is a fascist to his core. And, I think about the fate of the Munich Post in the early 1930s. They were doing what they could to try to warn about Hitler. And there are a lot of people like you who are warning about Hitler. And by the way, I used to resent when other journalists they'd go for the Hitler comparison. I go, come on, for 35 years. It was like, don't do that. Now it's Trump who brings up Hitler, Trump who has lunch with Nazis, and Trump who is, speaking Hitlerian language. So to view this as just another election is really, talk about dereliction of duty. Anybody who does is doing so. And as far as your question about this being a realignment, you're absolutely right. All you have to do is talk to people like Stuart Stevens, who ran Romney's campaign, or Steve Schmidt, who ran McCain's campaign. There is nothing, not a scintilla of conservatism about Donald Trump. There's not only on the issues, like, he's a protectionist, he's an isolationist. These things are totally contrary to what conservatives have stood for a very long time. But just on the basic issue of conserving our system. And this is why, traditional conservatives like George Will and so many Reagan Republicans are voting Democratic. They're voting for Kamala Harris. Even Brett Stevens in the New York Times finally said, okay, he's going to go for Harris. And this election is going to be largely determined by whether Harris can get more former or current Republicans and right-leaning independents to recognize the stakes in the counties around Philadelphia, around Pittsburgh, around Detroit. And if she can improve on Biden's margins in those counties, so Biden got 52% in Bucks County. She gets it up to 54, 55%. She wins Pennsylvania. She wins the election. So in some ways, there's been like too much, I think a little too much analysis on the Black and Latino vote, which will probably end up pretty close to where they were in 2020, and too little analysis of the suburban vote. So there's some progressives who might want, why is Harris hanging out with Liz Cheney? Because she wants to win the election and she needs to. And people like AOC know this, and there is a chance for kind of a new coalition that is real Americans who respect our system versus people who are un-American. There's no other way to describe Trump and the people around him. And I think a lot of people voting for him, I understand they have limited sources of information. I recommend that people watch Mark Kelly's confrontation with a veteran, where the veteran had heard nothing about Trump's disrespect for veterans, calling them losers. And after Kelly explained this to him, he said, wow, I never heard any of that. And he, was wearing a MAGA cap, but he was seeing things differently. That guy was never told the truth. And I have a lot about this in my book, because my father, like George H.W. Bush, volunteered to protect democracy, flew 31 combat missions, was shot down. And if he could risk his life to protect democracy, we don't even have to risk our lives to say this is not a test. This is for all the marbles for our system. And I think a lot of Republicans, if they are brought to some understanding of this, you're not going to convince the MAGA people, but there are enough people who still haven't decided, that if you can, send them my book or call them up on the phone and have a real conversation with them, if they're really thinking, oh, I don't want to vote for the lesser of two evils, I'm going to stay home, leave the top of the ballot blank, you've got to figure out who those people are and try to reason with them.
Want to just talk briefly about that worldview that you mentioned of J.D. Vance, because it doesn't get a lot of attention. You go into it, it's been described as neo-reactionary. There's a philosopher, Curtis Yarvin, who believes against advancement and progress. And a lot of the views are actually formed by this ex-computer programmer with this kind of, niche following online, and J.D. Vance subscribes to that. And you do a lot of research on that. So just let our viewers know what that's about and how dangerous it is.
Well, so you said you were very kind to Curtis Yarvin, who, I have this Substack newsletter called Old Goats, and I did a piece when Vance went on the ticket, or no, before he was on the ticket, about Vance and this guy Yarvin, who's very smart. He writes very well, and he is, without the slightest exaggeration, a self-described monarchist. He believes that things are better when there is kind of a CEO of the country, a monarch who is all powerful. And there are a lot of authoritarians in the Republican Party, and J.D. Vance is among them. And Peter Thiel, who's been bankrolling J.D. Vance, has made it very clear he doesn't believe democracy is the best system. This is very familiar for me, because my first book was about Franklin Roosevelt and first 100 days. And there were a lot of people then that favored dictatorship. Studebaker had a car called the Dictator that sold pretty well. Even Walter Lippmann and Eleanor Roosevelt advised Franklin at the beginning of his presidency, you might have to adopt a mild species of dictatorship. He rejected all that advice. But, these guys, they really do believe in that authoritarian model. And the Conservative Political Action Committee, and as we discussed, they shouldn't be called conservative, the authoritarian, MAGA Political Action Committee, last year, where did they hold their annual meeting? In Hungary. They are explicit about using the Hungarian authoritarian playbook. And, Trump, we all know that the only person he's never criticized, never had a single critical word to say about, is Vladimir Putin, the only person in the world. He's issued thousands of insults against national heroes, Republican presidents, anybody in the Republican Party who doesn't support him, he attacks. The only person he hasn't criticized is Putin. These are his role models, and he makes it very clear. And so when Milley says he's a fascist to his core, he's not exaggerating. Milley knows him. And then the Trump people go, oh, these are just the people who were fired, Tom Esper and Bolton and Milley and a bunch of others. They were fired. Milley wasn't fired. His term expired as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, our top military commander. And so it's really important. I think Harris is generally doing a good job with this, that, you get the message out about what the stakes are in the closing days of the campaign, and also explain how he's just too old, and I think people don't like that. They don't want to have they were concerned about it rightly with Biden. And by the way, I tell the story in my book of how Nancy Pelosi maneuvered Biden off the ticket, which is a story that hasn't been told before. And, but, people thought about this with Biden. I strongly felt Biden shouldn't be the candidate. Now we got to make the same argument about Trump. He's just too damn old. And he's already partly senile and saying totally unhinged things. And so this, to me, in the closing weeks, 2 weeks of the campaign, this has to be an important theme, is to just really drive home January 6th. He calls it a day of love. Americans don't like what happened on January 6th. They just have to be reminded of it. And they also have to be reminded of the cruelty. So, I was really struck. I didn't think this got nearly enough attention, that when he said the enemy from within, that was who he was against. And then Governor Youngkin tried to tell Jake Tapper that he was talking about migrants. And actually, in the various times he's talked about, he has actually identified Americans who are the enemy from within, Adam Schiff and the Pelosi's. So think about that for a second. Let's take Schiff and Nancy Pelosi out of there. He attacks politicians all the time, now with profanity. Let's just talk about Paul Pelosi, 82-year-old man, assaulted, hit with a hammer, which fractures his skull, by a Trump cultist, while he's still in the hospital near death a couple of years ago. Donald Trump is making fun of him the way he made fun of handicapped people. He's using conspiracy theories that are completely ridiculous. Nancy Pelosi called him sick when he did this. Joe Biden in private called him a sick, we can say it on your show, a sick fuck. And he is a sick fuck. And that has to be conveyed. We can't have a sick fuck as our president.
American Reckoning, out October 22nd by Jonathan Alter, Inside Trump's Trial and My Own. I've read it. It's great. All the might is mighty. Go make sure you order it now so you can try to get it before the election. And as Jonathan said, maybe you put it in on the couch of that uncle or that cousin or that neighbor or whoever.
And there's some happy, just Ben, one final thing. There's some happy stuff in the book because he was brought to accountability in that trial. And so now the big jury is out. The little jury held him accountable in the felony trial. Now the big jury, the electorate is deliberating. And if you order it now, you'll get it by the middle of the week.
Go order it right now. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 4 million subscribers. Thanks everybody for watching and have a great day.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram @MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.